All right, defense mechanisms and best practices. So, what can you do to prevent 0 days from affecting your network? And obviously, these are hard to detect because it's a flaw in a software where there's no patch, there's no security update, and a lot of times we talked about how malicious actors are finding them before we do. But Aaron, there are some things that you can do to take some preventative measures that we have here.
Yeah, and this again can kind of be summed up as just further attack surface management. Patching here is critically important because there may be cases where you have to push a patch out to something that is exposed to the internet essentially overnight. So making sure that those systems and processes are tested. Network segmentation is another big one here. Obviously, with the harder it is to spread between network segments, the harder it is to kind of widen the impact of an attack. And that kind of speaks to zero trust as well, identity access management, kind of being able to control who can talk to who and when. And then things like threat intelligence, anomaly-based detection methods, IDS, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, all kind of can contribute to providing a comprehensive way to both prevent and prepare for these kind of attacks.
I would say also too, since we've talked a lot about how this is supply chain and third party related, make sure you're talking to your vendors about patching too and how what their patching schedule looks like,
Yeah.
because those are the ones that you're going to be hit by the most. And the assessment process for vulnerabilities, so identifying, defining, classifying vulnerabilities in systems. The important note here about vulnerability assessments, I think, is that they're not going to identify 0 days, but they can help prepare for them, Aaron.
Yeah, and even further on this point, historically, the places that 0 days have been discovered, 4 or 5 months down the line, is through vulnerability assessments. It's through regular reviews of infrastructure, and something just stands out that turns into a full blown compromise or something like that. So it's extremely important to, especially when it comes to vulnerability assessments, to keep those regular, to pay attention to the results, to continually improve and harden pretty much any kind of network infrastructure endpoints that you can against these kind of attacks.
IT must be agile. So when if you do face a 0 day before there's a fix, what can you do? So you got to ask yourself what systems can be impacted by the vulnerability. What's the scope? Learning how to take systems offline safely. And are there critical systems you cannot take offline? And are there workarounds we can employ? And Aaron, this is kind of a big deal for a lot of our audience because obviously in public safety and government, you have a lot of critical systems that can't be
Yep.
offline. So you have to find workarounds for these things.
Yep, and that's a huge pain point with 0 days. Is it's a little bit of a catch-22. Is if you can't take a system offline to patch it, it might get hit by a 0 day and end up being needed to be taken offline anyway. But this in particular, in terms of the ability to patch these things, to understand how they can be taken on and offline, the criticality, all of that speaks to having like a comprehensive incident response plan, having that be tested, implemented, and revised to make sure that when because especially when we're talking about 0 days, it's sometimes it's just a matter of not a matter of if but when. So being prepared to respond to these things is incredibly important.
And patch management cannot prevent 0 day attacks, obviously, but it can reduce your exposure window if you can deploy it quickly before attackers can identify the vulnerability and exploit it. So that's if you can get a patch out in a couple of hours or days. And always important to document and review software versions, making sure that your patches are safely applied, but make sure the patches also don't have vulnerabilities, because I know I've seen that be an issue before too.
Yeah, and especially with 0 days, in some cases you'll see mitigations or workarounds prior to a patch. So being able to quickly implement those and verify that they don't impact system functionality, things like that, can be critical in especially in attacks we've seen like Log4Shell, where it's just a matter of whether or not you get scanned when your system is vulnerable.
Incident response plans. This is one where you should have you should have 0 day responses. So if you are impacted by a vulnerability or an exploitation of a 0 day, this should be a piece of your playbook. So make sure you're having that in your plans as well. That should be part of it. And then conduct regular cyber risk assessments. So building resilience through best practices. CISA recommends developing and testing your incident response plans, making sure that you are implementing network segmentation and access controls as well. There's a couple links you could find right there to go to best practices from CISA, as well as some resiliency and toolkits. Aaron was talking before about attack surface management, um, consisting of four processes: so asset discovery, classification, prioritization, monitoring the total exposure. We know that digital assets continue to increase, as Aaron talked about, adopting to the cloud has put a lot of threats online that maybe weren't necessarily meant to be.
Yeah, and
Aaron?
this all speaks to just security and layers. It's not just enough to have IDS and IPS. You also need to make sure that you can identify your systems, that you can remediate both non-severe and severe concerns, that you're able to test systems as they're brought online. Kind of all of these little things all help build together into a kind of a stronger security posture.
And what can happen if you don't manage your attack surface? Obviously, all that you want to know more about all your assets that are out there. There's shadow IT that can be deployed without approval on unknown assets. Obviously, we talked about third parties that are out there, so those can affect your infrastructure or digital
Yeah.
supply chain.
And
And you want to know about the assets they have as well.
this is something we've seen, especially with unknown kind of shadow assets. I responded to incidents that it was the smart HVAC system that was compromised and was talking out to a botnet, and it was something that the IT team had no idea was on the network. It had been there for months, so it is again to give your teams the best chance of responding quickly and effectively. You have to have this information in place beforehand.
And obviously, the winning combination we always talk about is, Aaron talked about heuristic analysis, but I think human to human expertise is needed to help you cut through the noise. So you've got obviously the monitoring option, and you've got behavioral based and AI driven alerts, and then it gives you a resilient cyber posture. I think combining the automation side with the human detection side is kind of the key piece here in all of this.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it. There's countless attacks that have been caught by someone who is familiar with the network, seeing an interaction and saying, "Hey, that's not supposed to be happening," and that turns into a whole incident response just from that.
And Aaron, you talked before about heuristic detection and how good guys can go about discovering a 0 day.
Yeah, so there's obviously a pretty long list of ways that these things can be discovered, but heuristic detection is a great place to start looking at behaviors and patterns on systems kind of compared to a baseline. Looking at statistics-based detection, this can be, something as simple as IP counts. If you've got a server that doesn't really talk to anybody, and then all of a sudden it's talking to half the internet, there's probably something going on there. And then another one we see, especially with larger companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, things like bug bounties, where there's an incentive to sort of responsibly disclose these things so that they can be patched, they can be mitigated prior to public disclosure, and usually that comes with some sort of monetary reward. Um, but again, all of these things kind of build together to give a strong foundation for getting these things handled.
And obviously, we always talk about continuous